Alright y'all, welcome back to Common Arms channel. So today's video is going to be another big recommendation that y'all have been sending to me, and that's going to be the raid on St. Nazaire, or Operation Chariot if you're familiar with that term. Now this particular raid happened about this time in 1942. It was March 28th, 1942, and yeah, if y'all aren't familiar with it, I would definitely recommend doing some research because there was a lot going on in this raid. You could spend honestly like a whole hour just explaining what one person did. Now the video I'm talking about is only it's only 3 minutes, but it sort of summarizes everything. Now I've done my own research as far as what happened during this raid, so I'll share that where I can. But again, this video is sort of an overview or a summary, so it doesn't give as much information. But if y'all enjoy this, I do recommend you guys do your own research to see what happened, because there's a lot of brave people that acted during this raid. But we'll get right into it and hope you guys enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to History Pod. On the 28th of March 1942, Operation Chariot successfully put the Normandy dry dock in the Nazi-occupied French town of Saint-Nazaire out of action. The raid by the Royal Navy and British Commandos was overseen by Combined Operations Headquarters. Their task was to disable the only dry dock on the Atlantic seaboard that was big enough to accommodate the terrifying German battleship Tirpitz.
Okay, so yes, this was a very strategic mission. The dry dock particularly was very strategic to the Germans because it was the only dry dock that they could utilize on the Atlantic and the western French coast for their larger battleships. Now this was important because if they were able to take out this dry dock, that means that huge naval threats wouldn't really be as big of an issue at least for a little bit, because then they would have to divert that ship somewhere else. I don't know if they had to divert it all the way to Germany, but it was going to take a lot more time for them to refit and do maintenance on that particular ship. But yeah, you can tell it was pretty important if they had a bunch of Marine commandos in the Royal Navy spearheading this operation. And again, you can sort of go in and see all the experience that went into this. Obviously, you can imagine they had an experienced commander taking charge of this operation. But yeah, I do recommend you guys do a little bit of research as far as who took parts and how many people took part. I mean, again, you could spend so much time just talking about the individuals, because I think there was a few gallantry awards that were given during this operation, some very high ones too. So it's worth the research at least.
This was vital to British attempts to weaken the German presence in the Atlantic. If the Saint-Nazaire facility could be put out of action, the Germans would have to send Tirpitz home for any repairs, and this would ultimately keep the dangerous ship out of the Atlantic. 265 commandos and 346 Royal Navy personnel arrived at the French docks in a convoy led by the old British destroyer HMS Campbelltown in the early hours of the 28th of March.
Okay, so you can imagine it was pretty important if they had hundreds of Marine commandos taking part in this. If you're going to turn to someone to make sure that something was done correctly and that something was done in general, it's going to be the Marine commandos. I mean, you can look all throughout history. They turn to Marine commandos to make sure that they get very important things done. So they have a pretty good track record, and yeah, they were definitely putting a lot of trust in the commandos, which isn't unwarranted, obviously. But yeah, so if you're not familiar with dry docks, I'll explain that real quick. It's basically a structure on the water that they bring a ship in, and they sort of plug it up and drain all the water out so they can do maintenance and refit particular like shipping vessels or submarines or what have you. So they're pretty expensive. They don't have a whole lot of dry docks. So for them to take this out, it was definitely a big deal. It was definitely a strategic mission for them to take part of. And again, I'll try and add a little more information as this video goes on. But yeah, there's a whole lot going on. It took a whole lot of coordination because they had a bunch of different elements doing a bunch of different things. and it must have been a nightmare to try and coordinate all of this.
The convoy was spotted before reaching the enormous gates of the dry dock, but despite the intense fire from the German batteries on the shore, Campbelltown ploughed into the dock gates at 1:34 a.m. Commandos surged ashore to destroy key dock facilities with explosives, while assault teams tried to draw away German defenders.
Okay, so on the water itself, the Campbelltown was used to ram the gate, but it was also used as a landing craft. It had commandos on it that they would send ashore to do a bunch of other strategic missions, sort of other points on the port that they needed to take out to make sure that the mission was successful. And I know there was a lot of guns and whatnot firing at the ships, so they're trying to take those out so they could, do an evacuation by sea whenever they were done. So there's a bunch going on. There's a bunch of teams taking part in this, and even on the water, if you read into it a little bit, you had ships that were going off on their own to sort of act as a diversion. It wasn't part of the plan, but it was sort of them taking the initiative to sacrifice themselves to make sure that other Marine commandos would make it to shore and do other missions that they needed to get done. So there was a lot of sacrifices taking place on the water alone. I mean, you had other landing crafts that would charge and attack some of the German U-boats, and they were outgunned, but again, they were sacrificing themselves to make sure that other Marine commandos and other ships could get past and do their mission. So it's very humbling to read up on some of those individual stories alone. And also, fun fact: when they were first spotted, they were giving like a distress signal saying, you're firing on your own craft. This is like a damaged German vessel that you're firing upon. So it stopped the firing for a few minutes, and it sort of allowed them to close the gap a little bit more. But I think it's pretty funny that they were using things like that to make sure that the mission was successful, and just being the commander to pitch the idea of them slamming one of their ships into a gate and then blowing it up. If you tried pitching that nowadays, it'd probably be a little bit hard to get that mission approved. But yeah, there's a lot of luck going into this, and with that, a lot of gallantry and bravery. So, I mean, what more can you ask for? If luck and bravery go hand in hand and it works out, then you can do very impressive things like this raid.
Meanwhile, time fuses attached to explosives hidden in the bow of Campbelltown were set. With almost all the British evacuation ships destroyed or unable to reach the docks, it soon became clear that the commandos left on shore would be unable to leave by sea. They consequently fought on until they ran out of ammunition, after which all but 5 were taken prisoner. At around noon, the explosives inside Campbelltown detonated, destroying the dry dock. Only 228 men returned to England. 169 had been killed, and 205 became prisoners of war, but the raid itself was a success, as the dock remained inoperative for the rest of the war.
Yeah, okay, that goes to show alone that there was a bunch of badasses that took part in this operation. You had people that were fighting until they ran out of ammunition. It's easy for someone to just surrender, but to ask a human being to, or even just have a human being fight until they run out of ammunition, it takes a lot of guts, to say the least. And they were doing that to make sure the mission was completed, but they were also doing that to help their buddies out, to buy them a little more time. So you had people running out of ammunition, making sure that themselves and their buddies could have a shot of going back and making it alive. But yeah, the sea evacuation wasn't really an option for them anymore. So it was either go down fighting or run out of ammunition fighting, and then be forced to surrender. So it took a lot of audacity for all these men to do all of that. Now, I know there was a few that actually, I think it was a handful that made it to Spain. They made it all the way to Spain, and then from there they went back to Great Britain. But yeah, it probably took a lot of walking or what have you to make sure that they did that alone. These dudes were not quitters. They were not going down without a fight, and that's very obvious here. And yeah, if y'all have any personal stories or any like relatives that took part in this raid, or know a little bit about this raid, I'd love to hear what stories that they can tell. Because again, there's so many individual actions that occurred to make sure this mission was successful. And just like, again, you could focus on one person alone and spend days just researching what they did. But it's totally humbling to see what these people are capable of. Again, the Royal Marine Commandos, you can't really expect anything less. I have a whole lot of respect for them. Even back in the day, there weren't a whole lot of Americans doing things like this. And for all this to happen in one operation, it must have been crazy. It must have been people all over the place doing a bunch of things, taking the initiative to make sure that their buddies were safe and that the mission was going to be successful. But this was a really awesome recommendation. Again, if y'all aren't familiar with this, or even if you are, I do recommend you do your own research into what these people went through, because it is important to remember our history. It's important to remember what these people went through during these dire times during World War II alone. It is very important for us to recognize that and recognize the sacrifices that they made, for sure. But I really appreciate this recommendation. I appreciate all of y'all's recommendations, because I wouldn't have known about this if it weren't for all of y'all. I wouldn't have known about this raid. There's a whole lot of World War II battles and whatnot that get a lot of attention, but hearing some of the crazy stuff that somehow I wasn't aware of, it's sort of humbling in that regard too. But please keep the recommendations coming. I do love researching and learning, but it's crazy what human beings are capable of, and it's pretty obvious that I wasn't really as informed about what they were capable of as I thought before all of y'all's recommendations. So please keep them coming. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If y'all have any other awesome recommendations as far as historical events or people or anything like that, please send them my way. Even if you have any experiences, I'd love to hear this too. But I really appreciate you guys watching and supporting the channel. Again, it means a lot to hear what y'all have to say, and it means a lot to see your recommendations, because it really does humble me learning what these people are capable of. But yeah, that's about it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.